welcome to Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions get answered. If I don't have questions, I don't have a show. This is for December 2020. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. This will probably be my last Ask Earl of the year. I don't know if going into 2021 I'm going to move to doing it more often, but I've added a couple new things. One of the things I've added that's going to be a more regular feature is my the story behind the gear show. I had a lot of good response about the Noble Cooley snare drum, and that was something I added to Ask Earl a couple months back, and I've decided now to make it its own segment. So that'll give me an opportunity to get out and do a little bit more on-camera type videos, which you guys seem to like. You also seem to like my drum covers, and thank you all for watching drum covers. I really appreciate the questions. Now, a couple things I want to really say. Number one is follow me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram as Earl Drum. I have well over 1,000 clips up there, some Instagram TV videos that you can only find on Instagram TV. They're not available on YouTube. They get blocked. So follow me on Instagram if you're on Instagram, and I'll try to follow you back. If you say to me, hey, I'm one of your subs, I'll say, hey man, I'll follow you back if you want me to. Some of you guys don't want me to follow, I get you. You know, when I see a private account, I normally don't follow on Instagram. I don't follow every drummer because I know the game of Instagram, and I have a whole video on the game of Instagram from my perspective, of course. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Thank you all for watching my videos and your comments. I always appreciate it, and I try to make it a community thing, and I try to answer every comment I see. So thank you all for being part of this. This is officially my 3rd year complete. I started in 2017 with less than 100 subscribers. I mean, technically I started in 2006 or 7 with YouTube, but I threw a couple videos up and nobody really knew who I was. But then I made a video about 5 most important beats for playing in church, which has a lot of views. A lot of guys find me through that video. And did a couple talks about guys like John Hammond and Danny Seraphin and Paiste cymbals and Zildjian cymbals and Sabian cymbals and the perfect ride cymbal. And that all happened when I had very few subscribers and very limited number of, I didn't know who was watching this stuff. I was doing it more for me, Ask Earl Anything came out of me getting up to 400 subscribers and people asking me lots of questions more often, and I decided it would just be easier to answer in a video format. So that's where Ask Earl came from, and that started in 2018, and off I go. So I just really want to thank you all for watching my videos and asking questions and all that good stuff. So I got to get on with it today. Hopefully this will be a reasonably timed Ask Earl Anything, because I'm dropping the story about the gear, and we'll do a story about the gear soon. I promise you, probably before the end of the year, we'll do one of those. As is customary in Ask Earl Anything, I want to do a couple shout outs. First shout out I want to do to one of my longtime friends and subscribers, Rich Raw Dog. Rich Raw Dog hit the 1,000 sub mark, 1,000 subscribers. Woohoo, Rich. Thank you. Rock and roll, Rich. Rich is a 90s guy. He plays a lot of punk and rock and alternative, and he's from, I believe he's from the West Coast, Seattle area. So it's kind of his domain up there. So give Rich, if you don't know about Rich Raw Dog, look him up. He's a great guy, and add to his subscriber base. I want to talk about my friend Drumman 190's contest. No, he did not ask me to do this, by the way. I don't believe I'm in the contest. I don't believe so, even though I did send him a video. I said, if you want to throw me in, you can, but I don't think he's going to. I did suggest a couple other guys I thought might be good that, for the contest. So we'll see what happens. But Drumman 190 is doing a video contest. He's done these before. Matter of fact, the one that I got to know Drumman 190 from, Matthew from, was the 2017-18, it was right on the January 1st, 2018, where I won Drum Cover of the Year for this silly Kansas video that I did, Carry On Wayward Son. and I was off to the races. That's what really propelled me into 2018, really doing YouTube. So thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Bill. Drum covers by Bill, who was part of that contest. But this is a Drumman 190 thing this time, and he seems to be finding new drummers. So check his shout out shows and his new drummer shows, and check out his contest. So that was a freebie, Matthew, for you. And my real shout out of the month is a guy named Drumico, or Drumico. He's from Germany. His name is Gunter. Gunter does a lot of jazz, big band type stuff. He does swing, Latin. He can play rock. He'll play some Sting once in a while. He plays a lot of eclectic stuff. He plays stuff he wants to play. I could tell he's a working drummer. He's probably plays a lot in town, and I think he really started up during pandemic. I think that's when I found him, beginning of the year sometime, or maybe just before the pandemic. But the bottom line to the whole thing is he's just been starting out and getting things going. He's also on Instagram, so check him out on Instagram or check him out on YouTube. He plays an E-kit that looks like a real kit, like an acoustic kit. I think that's just for his setup at home, how he has to do things. Not everybody's been blessed with a studio where you can put mics and you don't bother your neighbors like I have. So I am blessed to have a recording studio in my 3-car garage that I've built and put together, and so I am blessed. Not everybody has that. If you don't have that, you might have to do e-drums. So I wanted to shout out to Drumico. He's one of the guys I wanted to shout out to. He does a lot of jazz stuff, a lot of he's a player. I can tell he's a player, and I think he plays acoustic kit. He's got an acoustic kit. He's got a couple videos on that, but most of the stuff he does on his channel is electronic drums. So check him out. So that's the shout outs for this month. And let's get to the questions this month. So this month we got some questions. And let's go to the first question. And let's see. My first question comes from another follower of mine, guy who follows me on Instagram and on YouTube, I believe, and he also follows me on Facebook. I get questions from him periodically. His name is Sean Woodley, and Sean's a really cool guy. He's a church drummer, and he had a question for me. He was playing a song called Happy Being Me, and I'm not sure who the artist is. Unfortunately, I make copies of things. I take screenshots to do this. So her name is, it's Anita Wilson. It's an album cover, so I think it's Anita Wilson or Anita Nelson. It's one or the other. Doesn't really matter because I'm not going to play the song for you. But the question he had for me was, how do I approach this? And he sent it to me. He said, I really need help trying to figure out how to approach this particular song. Now, the song had typical gospel chops kind of stuff on it with big fills. And the count-in was 1, 2, then a bop, and I think the hits were on 1 and 3. Bop, 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 bop. So it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It was something like that for the hits. But the count-in with the crazy, big fill the guy played on it, which was beautiful, by the way. It was a great fill. I don't know who the drummer was. Big linear fill was just throwing Sean. So I told Sean to count it in this way. Play a simpler fill and get the hits. So the fill was the fill I told him to play was a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone fill. So 1, 2. So that would have been the push, the 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. 1, 2. So you can also put in a little push to it towards those hits with more fills, very simple fills. So the reason I'm bringing this up was because the question was a personal question to me. But I think a lot of drummers deal with, how do I approach something when it's so outside my playing ability? And by the way, I would never play the fill the way that guy played it, but if I had to play it in church and make that happen, like I do a lot of times, I find something I simplify to make it work. Because the band doesn't really care if you play the big fill. What they care about is those hits are exactly where they need to be. So when you set them up to come in. And that's the key to the whole thing. So keep that in mind. And I thought it was a good concept question to keep in mind, that if you got stuck with something which has got big toms and big fills and you can't handle that, simplify it to something you can do and make sure you land the pushes the way they're properly pushed. And if you do that, you'll be a superstar. And by the way, when I first started playing gigs, I learned to do those kinds of things. Those were the kinds of things I learned that helped me to not throw the groove out. Because what people are hiring drummers for in bands usually is to play groove. If you're a guy that can take it over the top, that's wonderful. And when you're young, you try to take everything over the top. But as you get older, you start to realize it's not playing over the top, it's holding the band together. So that's the musical thing of the day, is how do I play something where I hold the band together? Simplify your fills, simplify your setups to make them work so the band doesn't get lost. So I thought Sean asked a great question on this one. And if you know the song Happy Being Me by Anita, I think it's Wilson, check it out and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about, because setting up that 1-3-1 pushes was a really important part of the intro. Once you got to the intro, it was all groove. So it really wasn't a hard song to play once you got into it. But that first intro, that first, I think it was 8 bars, it was all about landing all those pushes. I don't even think it came back in the end. I listened to the whole tune. So anyhow, something to think about. My next question comes from Robbie Rock Drummer. Robbie Rock Drummer. He said, very nice. I enjoy your videos 10 times more than channels with millions of subscribers and views. I see you use headsets in some of your videos. What do you use? So the question was, what kind of monitoring do I use? Most of my videos you're seeing a lot of now are my in-ear monitors that I bought in 2014, I believe. I ordered them in 2013. They came in 2014. They're 1964 years or 64 years triple drivers. They're actually 1964 years because that's how old they are, when the company was still called 1964 years, and they're triple drivers. They still sound great. They still work. I have replaced the cable once, but they still work fine, and no blowouts, no nothing. Great for in-ear monitors. Now they're custom in-ear monitors that fit the molds of my ears, so they literally are built for my head, my ears. So they're great to have. And the reason I wasn't using them prior to this a lot was because in the studio it's easier just to throw on a pair of headphones. But I've got these really expensive in-ear monitors, and I thought, you know, it'd be nice to use them once in a while. So, and plus I'm not using them in my current church gig situation. My current church gig, we're using floor monitors and no clicks. So it's a whole different thing when you're working in a church with clicks and in-ears. These were in my church bag pretty much. They were in my bag with everything else. If I got a call to do a church gig, I had my in-ear monitors for the gig. So that's why. Now, as far as headphones go, I have a variety of headphones in the studio. I have 2 pairs of Sennheiser HD 280 Pros, a set of Biodynamic DT770 Pros, a couple CAD 300 isolated headphones that are very similar to AKG 240s. Got a couple pairs of those that are good. They were cheap, and they sound great actually. And a set of Audio-Technica ATH M20s, which they actually are really nice headphones too. So I think I got them for my son Matt. So anyhow, those are the headphones I use when I'm using headphones. I also got a set of, I've gone through drum isolation headphones. So I've had Metrophones, I've had Vic Firth headphones. There's a bunch of those out there. Truthfully, when you think about headphones for recording, think about isolation headphones. stuff, this closed back headphones are going to keep the sound in, especially with a click going. So that's my only tip for you for the day on that one. My next question comes from Bill Moorehouse. He actually asked this question last Ask Earl Anything, and it was about his Dennis Chamber snare drum, and he said the Dennis Chamber snare drum had 2 snares on it. So I thought it was 2 throw-offs like the Dave Weckl. The Dave Weckl snare drum's got a throw-off and then a second throw-off right next to it, so you have 2 throw-offs to get 2 different sounds. The Dennis Chamber snare drum has a throw-off on the left side and a throw-off on the right side, and they're both 3-position throw-offs. So I've never played the Dennis Chambers drum. Bill swears by it. He sent me a video to ask the question. He showed me what the mechanism does. So I tried to do some research for you, Bill, and believe it or not, the only research I found, other than somebody playing one of these a couple different times in English, was videos in Japanese or Spanish that I couldn't understand what the guy was saying about his comment about it. So I'm going to go back to the idea that I've had 2 throw-offs on one on each side of the drum. What would the effect of that be? And I believe the effect for Dennis Chambers doing that on his drum was to get multiple different snare tensions, to get different sounds out of that drum. That's pretty much why he did it. So I'm sure if you put it tight on one side and a less tight on the other side, that might do something. You put them both in the middle, that's a different sound. You put them both loose, it's a different sound. Both tight, it's a different sound. So, or you take it off, I think, and you said if you take it off, it turns the snares off, which that would be really helpful, because I can't imagine having to flip both to turn off snares in the middle of a gig. It's already hard enough to flip it one time and put it back on. You know, if you're getting like going from a tom, like a timbali kind of snare kind of sound with the opened up snare, i.e. this is snare, this is not snare, okay? Then you want to go back to groove, you got to put it back in. So already that's a little weird move you got to do that. So I can't imagine that if you turn the one side down, it wouldn't drop the snares enough to actually turn it off. So, but I think that's the intention, is to get, 6 unique sounds out of the snares. And snare tension affects the sound of a drum. And if you're any kind of in a loose tension sound, like a bigger fat sound, the looser you get the snares sometimes can really make the like a ballad snare sound really cool. Sometimes you want to tighten it up to get a little bit more crispness if you're going for more orchestral kind of stuff or marching kind of things. So all those things are in play when we talk about snare drums and the snares themselves. So I think that's what the beauty of the Dennis Chambers snare drum is that. So, but until I play one, Bill, I really can't give any more comments about it, but I tried. So anyhow, thank you for the question. That was a good one, a really good question. Next question comes from my good friend Brian Corey, who's constantly writing on my videos. Thank you, Brian, for doing that. This is the next question for Ask Earl Anything. Is the Ludwig Black Beauty the real deal? Is it worth the money? Or will the Yamaha recording custom brass sound the same? Well, here's what I found out. The thing about the Ludwig Black Beauty is the Ludwig Black Beauty is a sponge shell. I don't think it has a seam in it. And I think most brass shells have a seam. And if this is a one-ply sponge shell, then there wouldn't be a seam in it, if you know what I mean. So I'm looking at my Black Beauty. I mean, this is a 2009 Black Beauty with my favorite head on it that I haven't changed. I have subscribers that tell me to change this head all the time. They really don't like the black brush stuff that's there. But the drum still sounds great, so the head doesn't get changed. Can't do anything about it, guys. Now, one of the things I will say about my Black Beauty is it's got a 42 strand snare strainer on it. Gretsch. I think it's a Gibraltar version of a Gretsch one though. But yeah, I think the thing about Ludwig drums is they don't have the seam. At least I can't find the seam on this drum. I'm looking at it, I'm saying, where's the seam? Most brass shell drums, you will find a seam. So that seamless spun shell is what really makes it unique. Now, if you're a Ludwig guy and you know there's a seam on this Black Beauty, you can yell at me, okay, and tell me you should know better than to say that kind of stuff. I got it, right? But I think that's the difference, truthfully, is the seam in the shell and versus the spun shell, which is seamless. I don't know how they make them, to be honest. That's the beauty. I mean, Ludwig Black Beauties are the standard of the industry. They're the standard. So everything else is measured by a Ludwig Black Beauty. When we talk about brass shell snare drums, thin brass shell snare drums, that's a Black Beauty. If we talk about a cast bell brass snare drum, we're talking about a Tama. That was first. That's the one they're all measured against. And I mean, there's some great cast bell brass snare drums out there. Companies make these drums, but they're all measured against the Tama. When we talk about a thin brass shell like a Black Beauty, it's all Ludwig, because Ludwig was first doing it. Now let me tell you my a little bit of this story, not a lot of it, because I don't really want to, I think it's a story for another day, but my first exposure to a brass Ludwig snare drum was in 1988. And at the time I was looking for a Pearl or Yamaha brass shell. I was actually looking for the Yamaha brass piccolo snare drum. And that's the drum I wanted, was a Ludwig. I wanted a Yamaha brass piccolo 3.5 by 14. Of course, the price of that was about, I think, $100 more than the Pearl version of it. And Pearl had a free floating one that was 3.5 by 14 brass. And I ended up buying the Pearl brass 3.5 by 14. And that's the drum that I cracked the lead singer's head off. That's where I got my nickname, the Hammer, was from buying that piccolo snare drum and bringing it to practice. And he would stand in front of me and sing, and I would just crack on that thing. And he goes, I'm going to call you the Hammer because you're hammering my ears off with that stupid snare drum of yours. So, but how does that relate to the Ludwig brass shell snare drum? Well, the same day I went to look at that, for those piccolos, the Yamaha and the Pearl, and I bought the Pearl that day. The guy behind the counter, I believe it was at Drummers World in New York, so I believe it was Barry Greenspan was the owner of the shop. I bought stuff there before. He pulled out this brass shell Ludwig, WFL Ludwig snare drum, 5 by 14. And it was used, and it was in really good condition, but it had a little bit of rust on the shell. You know, or blemish on the shell. I'm not even sure if it was rust. It might have been blemish, just a blemish on the shell, the brass shell. And it bothered me. And I looked at it, just was used, but it was $300. And I would hit it and I would go, oh, it sounds so good. But it's used and it's got a blemish. So I'm going to spend $300 on a snare drum. This is the most I've ever spent on a snare drum at that point. And my wife is with me, and we kept going back and forth, and I ended up buying the brass free floater 3.5 by 14 for $315. The brass Ludwig WFL from the 50s, this is 1988, that drum was going for $300. Well, that sound haunted me for years, because every time I'd pick up an Acrolite, or I'd pick up a Superphonic, or I would hit a Ludwig snare drum, I kept looking for that sound. And then one day, my friend Ken Burton showed up in my studio with this. I got this 5 by 14 Ludwig Superphonic. And I hit it, and I said, because actually I hit it and it wasn't tuned right at that point. Ken is notorious for bringing drums in with the bottom head not tuned tight enough. So he brought it in, and I said, can I play with it a little bit? And I tightened the bottom head down, and then I hit it, and I loved it. And I said, that's the sound of that snare drum from back in 1988, where I bought the brass piccolo. And I said, what can I do to trade to get this drum from you? And he said, well, I need another Ludwig, because he's a Ludwig guy. The only Ludwig I had hanging around that he would trade for that drum was my phosphorus bronze 6.5 by 14 hand hammered Bill Stewart snare drum. My friend Scott gave it to me It was a great snare drum. It was 6.5 by 14. It was bottom sized, you know. Had a great sound to it, but I gave it up to get this Black Beauty, and that was 2000. I think it was 2008 or 9, right around that. I think it was 2009 when I did it. I haven't regretted it. This drum sounds awesome. Matter of fact, I had just got the 6.5 by 14 DMR, so it was right around 2008, 2009. And I think that's the reason why I gave up that Bill Stewart hand-hammered bronze Ludwig shell, because that drum was close enough to, I was so digging the cast aluminum drum I had that I thought if I'm going to go to a 6.5 by 14 metal drum, I'm going to go for that drum. And I thought I didn't have a 5-inch that I loved. Now, I have played 5-inch brass snare drums, and they're not all the same. So this goes back to your question, Brian. Are they the same? They're not. I have a 5-inch brass, chrome over brass Gretsch snare drum, 8 lugs, not the same as this drum. I have had, and I have played many of the brass snare drums from all the different companies, Pearl, Yamaha. They do not sound like this drum. So is a Ludwig Black Beauty worth the money? Yes, it is, as far as I'm concerned. There is a certain sound to a Ludwig Black Beauty that it's the sound. It's the sound you want. So I am quite happy with this Ludwig Black Beauty. And this is another one of those drums that doesn't get traded and doesn't go anywhere. So I have a few drums that I don't trade and I don't, get rid of. But this is one of them. So it's a great question, though. If you could find a brass WFL, that'd be the only thing that'd be better. And it probably was an 8 lug, too. So this is a 10 lug. And if I could find a brass WFL 8 lug 50 snare drum, I would buy it in a heartbeat. Or if I could find a chrome over brass Ludwig or WFL drum, I would buy that in a heartbeat if I knew it was brass, chrome over brass. The old ones. The new ones sound good too. Matter of fact, Ken had a new one too at one point. That's another story. So I'll stay out of that one. All right. Another question. This is from Steve Roginski. And he asked me a question. He said, nice Ask Earl Anything. Do you think there's a real difference between a 10 lug and an 8 lug 22-inch bass drum? I have 2 kits, a 9-piece Yamaha Stage Custom with a 22, 8 lug, and I have a 5-piece Yamaha Recording Custom 22 with a 10 lug. I recently picked up the Yamaha Recording Customs, used only a few years at almost half price. To me, the bass drum on the cheap Stage Custom sounds bigger, warmer, and deeper. The expensive Recording Custom with 10 lugs is big and heavy hardware and extends from front to back, and it just doesn't project as well. I have the same batter head on each, an EMAD 2 Evans head. So, Steve, here's the answer to the question. I did answer it in the response back to you, but I think you wanted me to answer it on the show. The difference is not the amount of lugs on the drum, I don't believe, on that scenario. I think the difference is birch to maple. Now, I don't think 8 lugs versus 10 lugs makes a whole lot of difference. It's just about fine tuning. Matter of fact, I think some snare drums with 8 lugs sound better than drums with 10 lugs. But you get more fine tuning the more lugs are on there. When drum companies started using less lugs on drums, it usually represented a budget model drum kit, meaning it was a student model or an intermediate model, because every lug cost the company money. This is why Ludwig built the Club Date kit. If any of you guys are familiar with the Ludwig Club Date kit, it had one center lug, and it had long lugs to the top and the bottom. So in the 60s, when the Beatles came out and Ludwig started making Beatle kits everywhere, they wanted to have a cheaper alternative. So they took the same Ludwig shell they were making with the Beatle kits with all the lugs on it, and they started making Club Date kits. Actually, they did it before the Beatles, but it became just as popular with the Beatles because they were selling so many drums. The whole thing with those Club Date kits they're the same shell as you'd find on a classic Ludwig drum kit. The only difference was they cheaped out on the amount of lugs so they could sell it for cheaper money. So if you get a Club Day kit, you essentially got a Ludwig Classic kit, and they sound like great drums. And if you got one from the 50s, you got mahogany up to a certain point in the 60s where it went to maple with the re-rings. And then they stopped making them. And now they make them today, and now they make them in some kind of cherry wood or something. They're not mahogany or maple. But it used to be mahogany poplar, and then it was maple poplar for those Club Day kits. I had one. That's one of those things I wish I hadn't given away. We won't go there today. So let's go back to the bass drum. I think the difference with the Yamaha Recording Custom bass drum is it's Birch. And a lot of Yamaha guys will get a maple bass drum for their kit, and they'll use the Birch toms because the Recording Custom Birch toms are standard in the recording industry. So a lot of guys like Paul Lime and Steve Gadd would use maple bass drums with the Birch toms. Matter of fact, there's a video of Paul Lime playing at Modern Drum Fest. He has a maple custom 24-inch bass drum, and he's got his Recording Custom toms. Steve Gadd had a kit made for him by Yamaha, the 30th anniversary kit. It has a maple bass drum and Birch toms. So apparently that's a popular thing to do, is to have a maple bass drum and Birch toms for Yamaha drums. And apparently the old Recording Custom bass drums didn't have the sound of a maple Gretsch drum. So a lot of guys were using the Recording Custom toms with a different bass drum, a maple bass drum. So I think that's the difference. The Stage Customs had a maple bass drum. When you got to Stage Custom, they started making maple drums. As a matter of fact, I have a Stage Custom kit right outside here. This is my son-in-law's kit, sits in the corner. So I think that's the difference, Steve. Anyhow, hope that helps. Let's see, I got a couple more questions. Let's see. Okay. Next question comes from House Luna. He said, love the sustain on your cymbals. Any tips for amateurs like me? Miking preferences, compression settings, height of overheads. All right. This is going to be a quick lesson on overheads. Right above my head are two microphones. I don't know if they're in the camera or not. Here's the first thing about drum miking. If you can put your overheads over your head, your mics are hearing what you hear. When I record my drum covers, I'm listening to mostly the overhead mics, a little kick and snare. I don't really turn the tom mics on, to be honest. They just record into the program. So I am actually mixing myself through these overheads. Now, the key to overheads is to not have phase issues. The best way to not have a phase issue is an XY pattern. XY pattern means you've got one going this way and one going that way. It gives you a true stereo, but it doesn't give you the phase issue. And if you center this properly, where it's over top of you and it's sitting right with the bass drum and the snare drum, you get everything in right place, and everything lines up in the DAW a lot nicer. So I think a lot of my drum sound has to do with the way I mic the kick, snare, and the overheads. I have used space pairs. I have used the Glyn Johns effect, one down low, one overhead. I've done all kinds of things. I've done all kinds of miking techniques, but this is the most basic one. Usually this needs to be about 5 feet to 6 feet above the kit. I have a low ceiling in here. I think my ceilings are about 7.5 feet, and it seems to work fine for me. So that's where I like to have it. So on both my kits, I use an XY right over top of the kick drum and the snare drum. So the other one comes a little bit more over the middle. This one's a little behind over my head, but they both work. As far as compression goes and EQ, that's a long video. One of these days I'm going to have to do something. If I can ever figure out how to use OBS or any of those programs that record screens and audio at the same time, maybe I'll do that someday. Haven't taken the time to learn that. I'm just still kicking out drum covers and having fun. That's a lot of work to learn it. I've learned a lot about recording, and I've learned a lot about video, and I've learned a lot about Final Cut. And the things I need to do to make my drum videos look cool, I do it. But things like on the Mac, following the mouse and moves and getting the sound right into a video, haven't done that yet. And that's one of the things I got to do. So sorry about that, but hopefully one day I'll do that. But that's my tip about miking. XY over the head And then when you record, put your overheads a little bit louder in your ears. That way you can actually balance yourself out over the kit. And when you're playing a big kit, it's very important you balance yourself out. So, all right. The last question I thought was the coolest question. So, I think this has gone longer than I thought it was going to go. My last question comes from Richard Burton. And he said, this is for the next Ask Earl Anything. What was the worst gig you ever played at? Okay, so over my career, I probably have a few worst gigs, probably. Truth of the matter is, worst gigs for me ended up being worst gigs because of things I did more than anything else. So I'll tell you 3 different things. The first one comes down to being in love with my wife, being on a payphone on the Garden State Parkway, and getting to a big band gig with 15 people on the stage for a wedding, right at the downbeat of the wedding. So I was late. That became a worse gig for me. That's probably my worst gig ever, because when you're late for a gig and you're the drummer and it takes another 10 minutes to set up, you got a lot of problems. When you've got 10 minutes to set up and you've got 100 charts on a music stand and you got to find all the charts to start playing and they're calling them by numbers, that first set was hell, I will tell you. That was hell for me. Now, I got through that gig and it all turned out fine, and I didn't blow anything too badly, and I didn't miss any hits too badly. I was about 21 years old at the time. I had just gotten out of college. It was the summer before I was 22, and it was before I engaged to my wife. I got engaged to my wife. I got married at 22 in March of '83. So this was like 82, just out of college, and one of my college friends sent me on a big band gig. Anyhow, I never got called back from that band for quite a few years. I didn't get called back. And then one day, my friend Scott Hazen couldn't do the gig, and he threw my name to the guy. And I'm surprised the guy didn't remember my name. But I got on the gig again. It was about 5-6 years later I was sent on the gig. I was solidly in my 20s in the late mid-80s, and I got on that gig, and it was actually one of my favorite gigs I ever playing with that big band, because I wasn't a great big band drummer. I'm still not a great big band drummer. I have some big band covers. You guys can see me, watch me reading and stuff. But why it was a favorite gig was I was not making all the hits. But we got to the first break, and I was talking to the bass player, and the bass player said to me, "Hey man, you sound really good. You sound better than most of the drummers that come on this gig." And I said, "Well, thanks, but I'm like not making all the hits. I'm like missing a lot of hits." He goes, "Yeah, you're missing all the hits, but you know what you're not doing? You're not losing the groove. You stay right in the pocket. You don't move. You stay right there with me. We stay together, so you miss a few horn hits. No big deal. You're making all the cuts. You're making all the endings. You're there in the chart, but you're not making all the hits. Big deal. You are swinging, and that's all that matters." And that was a big, huge lesson for me at 26, 27 years of age. And the fact I got called back to the gig was a huge one for me. So that's a gig. That was probably my worst gig ever as for me, because I felt so embarrassed being on the gig. By the way, being late for a gig is not something you won't ever want to do. And I think I've only done it that one time. Now, one of the things I've done on gigs that are really annoying, I've done this mostly for when I was really young. I did it a couple times for trying out for a band, was I left my sticks at home. I did it once on a gig, but it was my own band. And that was a tough gig, because when I opened up my drums, I set my drums up and I didn't have my sticks. I had a broken stick that basically had a tip on it, and I had to take a roll of duct tape. Luckily, I had some duct tape with me, and I duct taped the one stick, and then I had a bigger, thicker stick, a marching stick in there. So I had 2 odd sticks, and I had one that was broken. And it was really a bad gig, and I had no brushes, I had nothing. But luckily, it was my gig, meaning it was my band. So I played the whole night with that odd pair of sticks and got through the gig. That's the second toughest gig. And the third gig was it's called a, what do they call this? They call it psychobilly. Now, my friend Mike Fasano plays in a psychobilly band, technically, even though I think they're getting more stray cat-like. I heard them, they're a band called Tiger Army. They do psychobilly. So they got like kind of a hard edge, stray cat kind of thing going on, So it's a lot of swung stuff in it. This guy wrote a lot of this, he called it psychobilly. So it was playing those kind of stray catish kind of, kind of like 50s, that kind of swung kind of rock music, like the Stray Cats, but faster and harder. So you're playing it with like a heavy metal guitarist. So I got this gig, and here's the interesting story about the gig. My friend didn't want to do the gig. He was in his church with me, this little house church we were meeting in my house at the time. And he sent his friend, who was the guitar player, he said, yeah, this guy can do the gig for you. He gave me the tape, I learned the songs, the guitar player and myself got together, we rehearsed the songs, and then we had a gig in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And it was in a bar, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, and most of the people in my church decided to come watch me play in this bar with this band. Now, I never met the bass player on the gig. I knew it was a girl, but I never met the bass player on the gig. And long and the short of the story is, I get to the gig. These guys the guy is 25, who's the screamo guitar player. The girl is 19, 20, okay? And I'm like 36, 37. I was 37. I was 37. My hair was going more gray all the time. And anyhow, the long and the short of that was people in the audience were calling me grandpa on the gig. But I kicked the crap out of this band. But the interesting part of the band was the girl bass player. She was dressed in a mini skirt with fishnet stockings and high heels. And she would get up on this upright acoustic bass and she would just slap it and grind the bass the whole time. It was absolutely the most strangest gig I ever played in my whole life. I got through the gig. It was embarrassing. I had friends there watching me play this gig. The music wasn't particularly fun for me, even though the opening act band, which was a surfer band, came up to me and they said, I've played with these guys before. This is the best they've ever sounded, was having you playing drums with them. But for me, it was a very uncomfortable gig playing with this girl, getting on top of the bass and grinding the bass. And it's a memory I never can get out of my head. And that's what I probably consider my worst gig. So that's why I told you it. Even though I had that missed late showing up to the big band gig. That was pretty bad. So anyhow, all that to say is, thank you for watching Ask Earl Anything. Richard, thank you for a great question. I hope this is a fun show. I hope you have a lot of fun with this one and enjoy the questions. Your questions make the show. I don't have questions. I don't have a show. Please ask questions, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. See you next time. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Bye, everybody.